Roman 2, Captain Starkey by Charles Lamb. To the editor of the Everyday Book. Dear Sir, I read your account of this unfortunate being, and his forlorn piece of self-history, with that smile of half-interest which the annals of insignificance excite, till I came to where he says, I was bound apprentice to Mr. William Byrd, an eminent writer and teacher of languages and mathematics, N.C., when I started as one does on the recognition of an old acquaintance in a supposed stranger. This then was that Starkey of whom I have heard my sister relate so many pleasant anecdotes, and whom, never having seen, I yet seem almost to remember. For nearly 50 years she had lost all sight of him, and behold the gentle usher of her youth, grown into an aged beggar, dubbed with an opprobrious title, to which he had no pretensions, an object and a May game. To what base purposes may we not return? What may not have been the meek creature's sufferings, what his wanderings, before he finally settled down in the comparative comfort of an old hospitaller of the almonry of Newcastle? And is poor Starkey dead? I was a scholar of that eminent writer that he speaks of, but Starkey had quitted the school about a year before I came to it. Still, the odour of his merits had left a fragrancy upon the recollection of the elder pupils. The schoolroom stands where it did, looking into a discoloured, dingy garden in the passage leading from Fetter Lane into Bartlett's buildings. It is still a school, though the main prop, alas, has fallen so ingloriously, and bears a Latin inscription over the entrance in the lane, which was unknown in our humbler times. Heaven knows what languages were taught in it then. I am sure that neither my sister nor myself brought any out of it, but a little of our native English. By mathematics, reader, must be understood ciphering. It was in fact a humble day school, at which reading and writing were taught to us boys in the morning, and the same slender erudition was communicated to the girls, our sisters, and C in the evening. Now Starkey presided under Byrd over both PG 352 establishments. In my time Mr. Cook, now or lately a respectable singer and performer at Drury Lane Theatre, and nephew to Mr. Byrd, had succeeded to him. I well remember Byrd. He was a squat, corpulent, middle-sized man, with something of the gentleman about him, and that peculiar mild tone, especially while he was inflicting punishment, which is so much more terrible to children than the angriest looks and gestures. Whippings were not frequent, but when they took place the correction was performed in a private room adjoining, whence we could only hear the plaints but saw nothing. This heightened the decorum and the solemnity, but the ordinary public chastisement was the bastinado, a stroke or two on the palm with that almost obsolete weapon now, the ferule. A ferule was a sort of flat ruler, widened at the inflicting end into a shape resembling a pear, but nothing like so sweet, with a delectable hole in the middle to raise blisters like a cupping-glass. I have an intense recollection of that disused instrument of torture, and the malignancy, in proportion to the apparent mildness, with which its strokes were applied. The idea of a rod is accompanied with something ludicrous, but by no process can I look back upon this blister-raiser with anything but unmingled horror. To make him look more formidable, if a pedagogue had need of these heightenings, Byrd wore one of those flowered Indian gowns, formerly in use with schoolmasters, the strange figures upon which we used to interpret into hieroglyphics of pain and suffering. But boyish fears apart, Byrd, I believe, was in the main a humane and judicious master. Oh, how I remember our legs wedged into those uncomfortable sloping desks where we sat elbowing each other, and the injunctions to attain a free hand, unattainable in that position. The first copy I wrote after, with its moral lesson, Art Improves Nature. The still earlier pothooks and the hangers, some traces of which I fear may yet be apparent in this manuscript. The truant looks sidelong to the garden, which seemed a mockery of our imprisonment. The prize for best spelling, which had almost turned my head, and which, to this day, I cannot reflect upon without a vanity, which I ought to be ashamed of. Our little leaden inkstands, not separately subsisting, but sunk into the desks. The bright, punctually washed morning fingers, darkening gradually PG 353 with another and another ink spot. What a world of little associated circumstances, pains and pleasures mingling their quotas of pleasure, arise at the reading of those few simple words. Mr. William Byrd, an eminent writer and teacher of languages and mathematics in Fetter Lane, Holborn. Poor Starkey, when young, had that peculiar stamp of old-fashionedness in his face, which makes it impossible for a beholder to predicate any particular age in the object. You can scarce make a guess between 17 and 37. This antique cast always seems to promise ill luck and penury, yet it seems he was not always the abject thing he came to. My sister, who well remembers him, can hardly forgive Mr. Thomas Ranson for making an etching so unlike her idea of him, when he was a youthful teacher at Mr. Byrd's school. Old age and poverty, a lifelong poverty she thinks, could at no time have so effaced the marks of native gentility, which were once so visible in a face, otherwise strikingly ugly, thin, and careworn. From her recollections of him, she thinks that he would have wanted bread before he would have begged or borrowed a halfpenny. If any of the girls, she says, who were my school fellows should be reading, through their aged spectacles, tidings from the dead of their youthful friend Starkey, they will feel a pang as I do at ever having teased his gentle spirit. They were big girls, it seems, too old to attend his instructions with the silence necessary, and however old age and a long state of beggary seemed to have reduced his writing faculties to a state of imbecility, in those days his language occasionally rose to the bold and figurative, for when he was in despair to stop their chattering, his ordinary phrase was, "Ladies, if you will not hold your peace, not all the powers in heaven can make you." Once he was missing for a day or two. He had run away. A little old unhappy-looking man brought him back. It was his father, and he did no business in the school that day, but sate moping in a corner with his hands before his face. And the girls, his tormentors, in pity for his case, for the rest of that day forbore to annoy him. I had been there but a few months, adds she, when Starkey, who was the chief instructor of us girls, communicated to us as a profound secret that the tragedy of Cato was shortly to be acted by the elder boys, and that we were to be invited to the representation. That PG 354 Starkey lent a helping hand in fashioning the actors, she remembers, and but for his unfortunate person, he might have had some distinguished part in the scene to enact. As it was, he had the arduous task of prompter assigned to him, and his feeble voice was heard clear and distinct, repeating the text during the whole performance. She describes her recollection of the cast of characters even now with a relish. Marcia by the handsome Edgar Hickman, who afterwards went to Africa, and of whom she never afterwards heard tidings. Lucia by Master Walker, whose sister was her particular friend. Cato by John Hunter, a masterly declaimer but a plain boy, and shorter by the head than his two sons in the scene, and c. In conclusion, Starkey appears to have been one of those mild spirits, which not originally deficient in understanding, are crushed by penury into dejection and feebleness. He might have proved a useful adjunct if not an ornament to society, if fortune had taken him into a very little fostering, but wanting that, he became a captain, a byword, and lived and died, a broken bulrush. Cl.